Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to the Albany Pine Bush Commission's quarterly board meeting. My name is Keith Gertz. I'm the Regional Director for DEC's Region 4. I also serve as the board chair. And the first thing I'd like to do is go around the table and introduce all the other board members that are here today. To my left is Chris Hauber, Executive Director of the Albany Pine Bush Commission. To his left is Mike McLaughlin, representing Albany County. To his left is Tony Wilkinson, representing the Nature Conservancy. And then jumping over to Harvey Alexander, citizen member. And then to Mike Lyons, representing the town of Colony. Nancy Pearson, citizen member. Don Sapos, representing the town of Guilderland. And John Brust, citizen member. So welcome everybody. The first item that we should consider is the minutes from the last board meeting. Can I have a motion with regards to the minutes?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you very much. Moving on, it's time to open up the public comment. If there's anybody in the public who would like to say a few words, now is the time to do so. Anyone? Okay, that's easy. Moving on to reports. For the DEC, back in January, DEC wildlife biologist Carl Parker and his team captured 14 female turkeys, captured them, banded them, and released them. This is part of a 4-year project to assess the mortality of female turkeys. One of the adult female turkeys was also equipped with a satellite radio transmitter, so I found that to be pretty interesting. Now I'd like to go around to the other board members if they have anything to report. Okay, this meeting's moving right along. Chris?
Okay. Couple of things. Quite often I will point your attention to the update. I would ask that you make sure that you go through that and see all the things that the staff have been up to since we last met in December. As usual, there's a lot of things going on in all the departments. One thing specifically I'll talk about is organizational structure, and that was in the first bullet about the Discovery Center. As you know, over the last, actually going back into the fall of 2013, we started this strategic planning process where we did the vision strategy. Many of you were involved in that, and lots of members of the public. And then from that, we came up with a marketing plan, which we call the Audience Development Plan. And then out of that has kind of grown looking at the organization as a whole and how we function and how to be more efficient and ultimately how to be more constituent focused. Hi, Chris. Hey, Chris Spencer from the City of Albany. So as part of that, I analyzed the staffing structure and we came up with a reorganization based on the planning that we went through. So that actually resulted in the elimination or the changing of the Discovery Center Director position. So that position no longer exists. And what we did is we now have the Education Program Director and the Communications Outreach Director reporting directly to me. Both of those positions will have a key role in being a constituent-centered organization. We've got to come up with an easier word. Focusing specifically on the audience development plan. And the facility itself now is managed by the Discovery Center Manager. So that's a position that we created to fill that gap that doesn't supervise education and communications, but supervises the staff of the Discovery Center. And Blake Etchison, who was our Education Program Assistant, is now the Discovery Center Manager. You can wave, Blake. And Blake has been in that role since the 26th of January, and she's doing an excellent job. Just a quick update on New York State budget and how that influences the commission. The executive budget proposed level funding for the commission of $2.125 million, which is flat from last year. And the Assembly and Senate just released both House their individual budgets. The Senate, on the Senate side, they increased the overall Environmental Protection Fund, but did not increase any specific line, including the Pine Bush. So we're still flat at 2.125. The Assembly increased the Environmental Protection Fund by $10 million to $182 million, and did increase specific lines and proposed an addition of $250,000 to the Pine Bush Commission. So where that ends up at the end of the day, you know, with the three-way agreement, it's hard to say. But if we remain flat, we're fortunate, and I think we're almost guaranteed to be there, so that's good. And from what I've heard in both houses, it looks like there probably will be an on-time budget for this year. A couple other quick things. There's a tag at the bottom of we're using now at the bottom of our agendas in addition to our mission statement, and that's come out specifically from the Ordinance Development Plan that we're globally aware, nationally significant, and locally distinct. Quick way to describe who we are, what we do, and what the Albany Pine Bush is all about. And with that, I will just talk quickly about Lupin Fest. Our Lupin Fest 2015 is May 16th from 11 to 5 here, and its focus this year, the theme is a block party, a Pine Bush block party. And here's the flyer. Pass those around. And we have Euro stickers that will be somewhat, more or less, a prize at Lupin Fest. So somehow, tying in with our vision strategy, whoever gets one of these, you have to somehow engage with the commission. You have to give us your email address, you have to volunteer, you have to do something. So there's an incentive to build our constituency. So here's a couple of stickers. And I want to thank Neil for taking on Lupin Fest this year. Neil Gifford, our conservation director, as the overall, what would we call you? Manager? Coordinator. No. and Jackie Citronetti for taking on all the logistics that she has, and she does such a good job with it. Is Jackie here? And that's it. And one thing I do need to add is I apologize. We do have one resolution that I didn't get on the agenda, and when we get to that, when we get to the end after Lisa's financial report, I can introduce the resolution. Any questions?
Chris, how's the land clearing doing at Madison Avenue Extension behind my office? And what would the extent of that be in acreage?
What's the extent in the acreage, Joel? It's the most we've ever done.
The pitch pine work you're talking about is about 85 acres.
Oh, I'm thinking of Muncie.
Right.
I'm thinking of locust clearing. You're asking about
He's asking about the
pine.
work.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's about 85 acres. The work got started much later than we anticipated. The contractor ran into some issues with staffing. So we got between 15 and 20 acres worked on this year, finished up. He's still working on it, as you know, out there, just kind of doing the final touches. And then next year, he will be back next winter, and we have a much more aggressive and better plan to finish the rest of the 85 acres.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Joel, can you also just mention, for those of you, if you recognize John, when you leave your office and you're going down Washington Avenue Extension, you look to your right, that locust clearing that's going on?
Yep.
Can you just update us on the status of that, Joel?
Yeah, so we started late last summer on 50 acres of locust removal. It's a smaller operation in the sense that it's just really two guys doing the work. But from our perspective, that's okay because the cost benefit to us was phenomenal. It's a really good setup, but it takes a little longer to knock out 50 acres. They did stop for about two or 3 weeks this winter when it was bitter cold, but they're back into it, and hopefully that should be all finished by the end of May at the latest.
Thank you.
Yep.
Mike?
If I could just go back to board members, I just want to say, I was here on a Sunday about 3 weeks ago when we had that first day above 30 degrees on a Sunday afternoon, and the snow was perfect and deep, and I'll tell you, this place was just hopping. There was families in the Discovery Center, there were people on the trails all over the place. You could see more experienced snowshoers helping people who needed some help getting their snowshoes on, getting them fitted, just people giving advice to other people on the trail. it was really something good to see. And I just want to relay that to the board as well as to the staff. Everything, you know, although the parking lot was nearly jammed full, and this was like 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you know, everything was running smoothly, and people were having a good time. So, thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Okay.
Okay.
Move on to the technical committee report with Neil Gifford.
Good morning.
Morning.
The technical committee met twice this past quarter, reviewing a total of 6 projects, 2 of which are new that I wanted to highlight for you. You know what, Larry, you take half and pass them the other way. Chris, you want to take half and pass them the other way? And the 2 new projects, everything is outlined in the quarterly report. The 2 new projects, one is we've been working with and communicating with the Region 1 of the New York State Department of Transportation and the City of Albany regarding improvements that they have planned for this spring to Washington Avenue Extension between the new roundabout at Fuller Road and the intersection up here with Route 155. Primarily, it's a repaving project, but they'll be moving the footprint a little bit and improving the landscaping and hopefully some signage as well related to help folks find their way to the preserve and specifically to the Discovery Center. And that's all a work in progress. They anticipate starting that repaving work in April or May. The second project is in the town of Guilderland, and it's in a non-protection area. It's an area that's been already developed, and it's at Crossgates Mall where they're looking to improve rapid bus transit with a new hub at the mall, and we're hoping there too that will give us an opportunity to engage the public, consistent with the strategic vision that we've developed for becoming more constituency centered.
Will that affect the bus route that comes by here?
No.
You may actually bring more people.
That's what I was hoping.
Yeah.
And that's all I was looking to do is highlight a couple of new projects. You've got the summary. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to entertain them. Otherwise, thank you very much.
Thank you. Lisa?
Good morning. The first piece of paper you'll find is a statement of financial activities. And I'll start with the revenue side. Our dues and contributions are higher than budget, and this is due to donations from our Friends Group, and our Trustco donation is up for the year. Government contracts and grants, they came in 93% of budget. This is our DEC revenue, direct correlation to our expenses, and this we will maximize our appropriation for the year at $2 million. Mitigation fees are coming in higher than budget, and this is due to an increased tonnage in the landfill each quarter this year. And that will come in higher than budget for year end too. Lease revenue is slightly higher in budget, and this is due to rent from the Barron's house. And other revenue is 153% of budget, and this is due to an increase in both merchandise sales and program revenue here at the Discovery Center. So our total revenue came in on budget through the month of January. Moving on to expenses, personnel and fringe are on budget through the month of January. It will be slightly under for year end. Travel and training are under budget. It's 58% of budget currently, and this also will come on a little bit under for our year-end financials. Contractual, we're at 73% of budget, and this is due to weather conditions, specifically to projects in stewardship, archaeological, and locust clearing, and that will end up a little bit under budget also. Communications is under budget, and this is due to savings in telecommunications, postage, and printing and advertising that we do locally here. Occupancy is under budget, and this will remain under budget for the year. This is due to payments and reduced rates for electric delivery, and gas delivery throughout the year. Supplies and equipment is under budget, $43,000. This will come in close to budget for year end. We are purchasing currently. Other expenses are slightly under budget, and this is due to a cost savings in insurance and a couple miscellaneous fees throughout the year. Overall revenue came in on budget, and expenses came in under budget through January. So giving us a higher net income of $386,000 through January, which is 10 months of our fiscal year. So any questions on that? Okay. Moving on to the statement of net assets. Our operating cash increased, and these are due to payments from DEC, increased payments from mitigation and Trustco donations throughout the year. Conservation and land reserves remain the same. Grant funds receivable increased due to money owed from DEC, and this has been paid. Accounts receivable increased slightly due to money owed from mitigation for the quarter, and this was also paid. Inventory remained the same. Prepaid expenses decreased due to the timing of year-end expenditures that fall into our next fiscal year. Investments increased $93,000 due to a positive performance in all three funds. Capital assets remained unchanged for the month of January, and total assets increased $482,000, slightly over last year, due mainly to an increase of cash and investments. So onto liabilities. Accounts payable and accrued expenses increased slightly. Deferred revenue remained the same. Net assets, investments and capital assets remain the same for the month of January. Reserved assets decreased slightly due to the funds for reserved assets being utilized for the year. Unreserved assets increased $483,000. So overall, our net assets increased $480,000 due to both a positive NOI and an increase in investment income. So, any questions on that? Okay. Moving on to our investment statement summary. The reserve fund had a positive performance through the month of January at 3.74%, as well as the Discovery Center endowment and the endowment both had a positive performance at 4.03 and 2.31%, giving us a positive performance and a gain of about $93,000 through the month of January for the year. Any questions? No? So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa.
Yeah. So does everybody have a copy of the resolution, action item A? So I apologize, it didn't get into your packet prior, and I apologize for the board packet going out later. That's completely my fault, not Marty's. Marty Monday asked me, when are you going to give me the materials for the board packet? And I said, and I thought I did last Wednesday, so that's completely my fault. So we have the Discovery Center here, the facility built and opened in 1987, and we have the same air handlers and heating system, boilers, and one of the boilers is down, as in down and unrepairable. So we have considered doing a replacement for a while, and now that we are functioning on one boiler, one furnace, now is the time to do it because we have to do that. We have to have two boilers for the facility. It's basically a requirement of our jurisdiction over the building. So currently, we're working with Cara Real Estate, our management firm, to do design work with an engineering firm. Actually, the engineering firm that originally looked at and developed the system when CEFCI was built, and also the engineering firm that worked with us when we updated the facility, Excel. So this is a resolution asking for authority for me to work with the property manager to do an RFP, to send out proposals, to get responses from contractors, to replace the boilers in the air handler system based on the design documents that we get in accordance with our purchasing procurement guidelines. And then the second part of the resolution is come back and report on the progress and the expenses at the June meeting. And the funding, and the reason I need this resolution is because it's not in the current budget that we had to pass in December. So the expenses will be covered either within, there will be funds left over in this fiscal year in the account, primarily from landfill mitigation, or we have funds in the reserve account. So the funds are there, but I need approval to be able to move ahead to do that.
Do you have a ballpark figure for what this is going to cost?
I don't know. I'll look across the room at our engineer on the board. All I'm going to say is we did an in-kind replacement for the chiller unit and air and cooling tower when we redid the building, which is basically the air conditioning system, and that was about 130 to 150,000 7 years ago. So my expectation is this will be similar. But also, we'll end up with a system that is completely much more efficient, and in the long run, just a better thing. It's an old system.
I think it's important to note that the boiler that's currently in operation is 1987 vintage
Yes.
boiler also.
Yes.
So
Yes,
one 1987 already went down.
correct. That's why we need to do this.
If you really wanted this to pass, you
When
would
I-
have had no
when I-
on today.
Right. If you didn't pass this, I would beg. Actually, no, I'd take you all in the back room and I'd show you the 30-inch crack in the boiler in the iron.
Bring them up
So-
to my office.
Is it that cold still?
Depends.
So is
We'll
this,
have an improved system.
would this replace the other one at some point too, or will just?
Both.
Oh, okay,
I'm sorry, Nancy, I can't see. Yes, this is a full replacement.
okay.
So it's a full replacement, both boilers, so you have, they cycle back and forth, and you always have, that's your backup. And then the air handler system, which is right behind this wall, which you hear sometimes in this room, that is behind the boilers. So if we're taking the boilers out, we might as well replace the air handlers to make them more efficient as well. Okay? Is there a motion for that?
Does that increase the LEED certification at all in the building?
It would add points to our lead, but to take us to the next level from gold to platinum it takes a lot. So it would add towards it. So the answer is yes, but it won't make us hit platinum, but it moves it towards it. John, that was a first, sir.
I'll make a motion.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to move on to the presentation and discussion topics with Key Bank.
We have Mike Durand and Cindy McDonald from Key Bank. We're going to hear from Mike.
Thank you. All right, good morning, everyone. It's my hope that the Finance Committee members remembered their presentations, because I only have 8. So we can either share with a friend or trust the information, or I can simply get more copies and distribute them at a later date. So thank you. As Chris mentioned, my name is Mike Durand. I'm Senior Vice President and Senior Portfolio Manager with Key Private Bank. My partner is Cindy McDonald, and Cindy is a Trust Officer, also Senior Vice President with the group. And together, we're responsible for overseeing the investment portfolios and just the overall relationship with the Albany Pine Bush. So coming in this morning, I thought if I were to sum up kind of the year and have a summary sheet, it would either have a big thumbs up or a green light on it. So the big giant summary picture is last year everything went well, not just in the markets but also in the portfolio. And when we're talking about things going well, we're not just talking about how much money did we make. We're also looking at things like risk. So to summarize, all the assets, the holdings, and the strategies for the endowment, for the reserve fund, and also for the Discovery Center Fund, all of those holdings and strategies are in line with the investment policy statement and the investment objective for Albany Pine Bush. Throughout the year, myself and Cindy communicate quite a lot with Chris and with Lisa to kind of go over the appropriateness of all the investments and make sure that everything we have makes sense for the endowment, and they do. Giving a little credit to the Finance Committee, we met last week, and I want to commend them because, as I think I talk about each year, the investment policy statement that you have drafted is clear, it's concise, and it is pertinent, and it actually is appropriate, again, for all the investments. I know a lot of work goes into that and making sure that that is in line. So, again, kudos to the Finance Committee and to Lisa in particular. Just talking about numbers, overall big picture numbers, I'm looking at tab 1 for those who have the portfolio, and really, again, big picture stuff, looking at the endowment, as of the end of February, which is when the kind of the statements here are run through, the balance was a little over 2.9 million, and the objective of the endowment funds is a balanced objective, so it's really a mix of equities and fixed income. And in general, when we have a balanced objective, we would be 50-50. We actually have a little bit higher allocation to the equity side, so it's closer to 55, with a little less on the fixed income side. Our take and our thoughts are that equities are still poised to perform better than fixed income, and the IPS allows us that leeway. So from a tactical standpoint, we're a little bit overweighted on the equity side, a little bit underweighted on the fixed income side, but it has done well, paid dividends, pardon the pun. For the last 12 months, to give you an idea for the endowment, the total portfolio as of the end of January returned about 6.4%. And for the last 3 years, this is the total portfolio. For the last 3 years, it's about 8.9%. And going back over the last 5 years, which would include 2010 and 2011, is about 7.7%. And again, this is when you hear about the equities, you hear about stock market, and you hear about big numbers over the last couple of years. There's a mix here. So there's bonds to mitigate risk, and there's equities to kind of continue that growth. Lisa mentioned some of that growth even just through the first month of January, I think up $94,000 or something in aggregate. So the overall goal here is two things. One, you want to maintain at least the corpus of the portfolio and grow where you can, but you need to be responsible from a public entity standpoint. And I think the board, along with the finance committee, does a good job of balancing those two. You really shouldn't expect really gigantic high performance numbers on the upside, but at the same time, we shouldn't come in with the really low ones. The idea is to balance that risk, but still allow the assets to grow. The performance for the reserve fund, which is tab 2, a little bit different. The goal here is maximum income, so it's basically 100% fixed income. The idea there is to maintain the corpus of the portfolio, but still try to grow it responsibly. And over the last 12 months, that portfolio is up about a little under 4%, 3.8%. And over the last 5 years, it's up about 2.9 or 3% overall. Staying ahead of inflation, but still maintaining the corpus of the portfolio. And in talking with Cindy before coming in today, I noticed that there hasn't been a lot of drawdowns on the portfolio, so they haven't been tapped for any resources. So all the income and dividends have gone back into growing the portfolio. So really, a really good job over the last few years there. And lastly, the Discovery Center is roughly about $95,000 in investable assets as of the end of February. It also has a balanced objective similar to the endowment, and the performance numbers for that are similar as well. Roughly about 7.6% over the last year, 8.25% or so over the last 3 years, and a similar number, 8.4% over the last 5 years. So overall, the numbers have been good. More importantly, they are in line with the goals and objectives of the Albany Pine Bush, not just the endowment, but also the reserves and the Discovery Center. And if anybody has any particular questions, I can obviously go into more detail, but a lot of the information is here in the packet and also included in the monthly statements that the Finance Committee receives. Any questions from anyone? No? All right.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you very much.
Mike always does a nice brief overview, so don't be afraid to ask questions, but just so you know, we spent a lot of time in the audit committee going back and forth and asking questions.
Yeah.
I should
I
say
did
we.
not think Mike could be this quick.
I try. I appreciate it. Thank you. That was my goal today.
Okay, next on the agenda is Jesse Hoffman.
I wasn't kidding. I'll have three thumbs.
I apologize.
Not really.
Strike from there.
All right, so my name is Jesse Hoffman. I'm the preserve steward and botanist here at the preserve. And today, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about native seed collection. I'm going to just jump right into it here because I have 20 minutes and I'm going to try to stick to that as best I can. So first off, why are we collecting seed? So as you know, the whole point of the preserve is to protect this globally rare inland pine barrens ecosystem, which is a threatened ecosystem. Globally rare, obviously there's not a lot of them around. It used to encompass many more acres, but through development, development always is a primary concern. So we're always trying to acquire new properties. And often the properties that we do get are no longer supporting really good high quality pine barrens. So those a lot of times need restoration. We've got habitat degradation is an issue, primarily through fire suppression. So pine barrens is an early successional ecosystem. It needs disturbance in order to thrive. And if you take the disturbance out of the ecosystem, then it starts to succeed into a more typical northern hardwood or mixed coniferous forest. So we have to do restoration work to restore abandoned pine barrens back into functional pine barrens. And then the bane of any land management organization, we've got invasive species. They're always in there taking over, making habitat unsuitable. So we do a lot of work as far as clearing invasive species, removing them from the landscape. And in order to do all this restoration work, whether it's from newly acquired properties, degraded habitat, or invasive species, we need sources of native seed. My colleague Steve Campbell is going to talk next about Carner blue butterflies over the last 8 years. And one statistic I thought was interesting that I pulled out of his report was down here that in 1997, the potential habitat, the habitat available to potentially support Carners, so that means pine barrens habitat with wild blue lupin growing on it, was only about 12 acres. And in 2014, we've bumped that number up to 415 acres. So that's a direct result of habitat restoration and planting, and we need seed in order to make that happen. So I'm going to just quickly go through what restoration looks like. This is a black locust clone. This is obviously not a picture of the pine bush, but it's a really good image of just showing how invasives take over. You've got a landscape here, and the whole center here is all black locust invasive species. This is what it looks like inside. You've got a monoculture of black locust above. The understory is typically other non-native invasive species or weedy natives like rubus, blackberries and brambles and things. And the only thing to do when you get to that stage of degraded habitat is start over. So we hire contractors to come in, clear cut the sites. They use heavy equipment, chop it all down, rip it all up, pull all the roots out of the ground, smooth it all back out, and then we come in with our equipment and replant. So we're removing invasive species, and we're ending up with habitat that looks like this. So this is not so much pine barrens as native prairie, but this is the first step in the process of restoring pine barrens. So we're going from non-native, doesn't support pine barren species, doesn't support Carner blue butterflies, to restored prairie, which is primarily native species, does contain wild blue lupin, does support Carner blue butterflies. And in order to get from here to here, we need lots of native seed. It doesn't do much good to remove invasives or remove the undesirable species if you can't replant with the native stuff. The bad guys are going to move right back in. So planting what we need out there is really important. So as far as seed acquisition, the vast majority of the seed that we use in restoration is hand collected from preserved lands. And the reason that we don't just go out there and buy it, there are several reasons. So first of all, a lot of the species aren't available at all. Second of all, the availability is inconsistent if they are available on the market. And then native seed is also really expensive. So my favorite statistic is that one of the species that we collect is called New Jersey tea, and the seed for that stuff is $800 a pound. So it's, when you're restoring many acres, the amounts of money add up really quickly. And then the other piece of it is that we're committed here to using local ecotype seed. So that means seed that is from the Glacial Lake Albany footprint. So within about a 50-mile radius of this location. And the reasons for that are that, first of all, we want to protect and preserve the genetic material, the unique genetic material from this region. And also, when you're using local ecotype seed, it's already adapted to the ecosystem here. So if you're getting seed, but it was from the Pacific Northwest or from the Midwest or somewhere else, it's going to be uniquely adapted to those environments. So by using local ecotype seed, not only do we protect our genetic material here, but we also give the seed the best chance of doing well. And that's the other reason that we can't buy seed, is that a lot of the seed that's out there is not our ecotype. Now, there are some species that we can buy or have donated from a company called Ernst Conservation Seeds. And they're probably, they're the biggest native seed producer in the Northeast, maybe even in the country. And many years ago, we gave them seed to start some of their field crops. So they grow our ecotype for us in other remote locations. And they've been really a great partner for us. Whenever I need seed, if we had a bad year and we need, we need to get some seed in, I call up Mark, who's the horticulturist there, and be like, hey, Mark, we need a couple pounds of bush clover, and he's like, he sends it right over. He never charges us, and it's a really good working relationship that we have with them. So I want to quickly just go through the species that we collect, and I put together these little seed boxes. So open those up and take a look. It's got all the species and what the seed looks like. It's just kind of interesting. The seed's kind of pretty. Hopefully everybody knows this one, right? Wild blue lupin. So that's the sole food source for the hardy blue butterfly caterpillars. One of our most important seed collection species. We devote a lot of time, energy, and resources to collecting the seeds for that. The next ones here, we've got showy teak trefoil, and then we've got goat's rue, butterfly milkweed, spreading dogbane, horseman, and New Jersey tea. And all of those are good nectar species. So those are plants that are flowering and producing good quantities of nectar while the adult corner blues are flying. So obviously we need something that they can eat when they're caterpillars, and we need something they can eat when they're adults. So that's kind of the reason that we've selected this particular suite of species. Then we've got things like bush clover and the two big grasses, big blue stem and Indian grass. Those are more structural species in the landscape. They're good native pine barren species, and they provide a little bit more structure. And then we've got two species of scrub oaks, and they're the major structural component in the landscape, the dominant shrub layer that's out there in the ecosystem. So how do we go about doing this? So the process consists of, first of all, being really vigilant about knowing what's out there on the ground, where these species are growing in the landscape, and watching them to see when they're starting to ripen. So you're always playing this game with trying to figure out when things are ripe enough to collect so that you end up with viable seed. But if you go too long, then things start to drop their seed or throw their seed out. So knowing where things are, keeping a careful eye on them, and then getting people out there on the ground to just physically collect the seed. And it basically consists of pulling off these seed pods. So you're out there in the landscape, moving through the landscape, bending over, crouching down. It's physical, it's hot, it's when you're out there on the ground, like you just have to do it when it's ready. You don't get to say like, it's kind of a crappy day out, we're not gonna collect seed today. When it's time, you gotta be out there doing it. And we're out there the name of the game is just quickly get in as much material as we can. So we're not worried about separating seeds from chaff or anything like that. We're just grabbing big chunks of these things, ripping them off and throwing them into bags. Getting the seed collected is really important. And I have a little video that some seasonal employees from a couple of years ago put together for lupin seed collection, so I'd share that with you. So we try to have fun out there and do this really important work. So in talking about the amount of seed that we need to get in, you've got the species list here, and then this is our current planting rate. So you can see some things like lupin, we plant really high, 3 pounds an acre. And to put that in perspective, 20 acres is about, that's a typical amount that we've restored in years past. So you need 60 pounds of pure lupin seed in order to restore 20 acres. It's a good amount of seed. Some of the other species, the nectar species, we plant a little bit less of, 1/10 of a pound an acre. You're still talking about multiple pounds of seed in order to accomplish this work. Bush clover, 1/2 pound, 10 pounds of pure seed. Scrub oaks. Scrub oak seed is, of course, acorns. Acorns are pretty heavy, so that number's a bit higher. The other piece of the picture, though, is that when you're out there collecting material, you're not collecting pure seed. So these are the ratios of how much material you have to collect in order to acquire 1 pound of seed. So for lupin, you've got to collect 28 pounds of material to get 1 pound of seed. And that's because lupin pods are really wet when you collect them. So you're losing a lot of moisture weight, and then you've got all the pods and all the leaves and bits of sticks and all the kind of junk that you're out there when you're just trying to rush around and get all the material in. You're collecting 28 times the amount you need to get 1 pound of seed. And the ratios are obviously different for everything. Back to scrub oaks again, at that point we're picking off individual acorns, so you're 100% of what you get is seed. But for a lot of the other species, you're out there on the ground, you're collecting and collecting. If you end up with 30 pounds of lupin, it's conceivable on a really good day for someone picking really hard to get 75 pounds of pods in a day. So it's quite a bit of labor to get this stuff in. And you can see, when you're out there in the ground, you're collecting this. This is what it ends up looking like in your bag, and then this is the actual amount that that's what we end up with. So you can see how those ratios come about. So as a real-world example, this spring, we're planting 27 acres of habitat over in the Rapp Road Barrens, restoration work land that we cleared 2 seasons ago. So in order to do that, we need 81 pounds of pure lupin seed. These 2 bags here, this is how much lupin seed we will be planting on the ground. So that's a little over 81 pounds, but that's what it looks like in pure seed format. So that means this previous season, we needed to have collected almost 2,300 pounds of plant material to make sure we had that seed for this season. And since I started, I've been keeping really good records on the wet weight of the seed material that we collect, how much seed that yields, how much time we spend to do that. So I've got all these calculations which allow me to plan the season well and figure out, okay, so we need 81 pounds. I know we're going to plant 27 acres, so that tells me we need 81 pounds. That tells me we need to collect this amount of pods, and it tells me we're going to spend this much time doing it. And you can see the amount of time and the amount of the pounds of material that you need are different depending on each species. So for something like this, you're able to collect a little bit more than 10 pounds an hour of lupin. But for something like bush clover, you're only collecting about 1 pound an hour. So the amount of effort it takes to get in that amount of seed varies widely depending on the species you're talking about. So how do we do this? How do we get all this stuff done? So I crunched numbers over the last 6 years, put all of our data together, and it turns out that, as you'd expect, seasonal employees do the brunt of the work. So the numbers, the percentage of seed collected, that's based on overall pounds of seed. So 55% of the seed collected over the last 6 years has been collected by seasonal employees. The time spent collecting number is the hours of time overall spent collecting. So 55% of the seed, 33% of the time spent by seasonal employees. Temporary day laborers. So I want to talk about day laborers for a minute. We use temporary hired help only during lupin season. I talked about having to know when seed is ripe enough to collect and then having a limited time period. For lupin, that time period is really limited. Like you have literally 1 week to collect the seed because as the seeds ripen, the pods pop and throw all the seed out. So you've got this really short window. We need to collect 2,200 pounds of pods. So it's kind of a all hands on deck effort by staff. We try to get all the volunteers that we can, and then we use temporary day labor to fill in the cracks, especially as we've really ramped up the amount of acreage we've done in restoration work. So these numbers are exclusively lupin seed. 26% of the overall seed collected by temporary day laborers, 19% of the time. And you can see they're spending less time and collecting more seed because they're collecting lupin, which is one of the easier species to collect. Volunteers, 14% of the seed collected, 42% of the time. A little bit less efficient, but free, so we'll take it. And then staff, full-time staff, about 5% of the seed and 6% of the time spent collecting. And then if we break down the volunteer numbers again, I'm going to talk about certified seed collectors on the next slide. They're a particular subset of volunteers, but they're pretty efficient, and they're out there on the ground. 56% of the volunteer, this is again of just the subset of volunteer seed collected by volunteers. 56% by the certified seed collector program. 25% by school groups. We have really good relationships with Farnsworth Middle School and the Albany Academies. Both of those school groups send kids out each year. This is probably only represents like 4 days and 2 or 3 hours on each of those days. But when you get 50 kids out there for a couple hours, it's amazing the amount of seed that you can get collected. Just more hands on the ground. Even if they're not that efficient, 50% of the time, only 25% of the seed, it's just the vast quantity of people out there getting the seed in. So we're really thankful for those relationships. And then other one-time volunteers. So this is people who are volunteering on a one-time basis, either on a weekend conservation day or someone who hears that we need help. We're always putting the word out there, especially during lupin seed collection season. So certified seed collectors, this is a program that I initiated in 2009. These are long-term volunteers, so we require a minimum 1-year commitment out of these people. And I basically put them through this certification process. So they're going through 3 training sessions. We do 2 evenings and then a Saturday morning. And the idea is that at the end of all of the training, we go through all these various topics. People will know how to confidently identify the seed collection species, how to confidently identify invasive species that we really want to make sure no one's accidentally collecting, and then kind of the logistics of how to tell when things are ripe, how to work with other volunteers, because we like those people to bring, to serve as kind of top-tier volunteers who can lead other volunteers. And then once they're certified, these people are free to go out on their own schedules, when they're done with work, in the mornings, whenever they're available, they can go out, collect seed on their own at their own pace, and then they just call me or send me an email and say, hey Jesse, I collected all the seed, I left it for you, and all I have to do is pick it up. So it's been a really valuable program. It requires, other than the initial training, it requires very little input on my part. I send emails when seed is ripe and let people know kind of when and where to go. I put together a map book for the whole preserve, so I can easily reference pages to, send them out to the map on page 43 or whatever it is. And then they just call me and they've done all the work for me. So it's been a really valuable program. Now, I'd like to talk about seed collection value, because this is one of the few places where you can really justify a program fiscally. Often, we're talking about ecosystem effects, things that are hard to quantify. But because you can buy seed, there's a price associated with how much value you're getting out of these things. And like we talked about, you can't reliably buy it, it's not our ecotype, but you have the number there. So again, this is information between 2009 and 2014. The value of seed collected by seasonal employees, $60,000 worth of seed out there that they have brought in to the preserve. This is an analysis that I like to do to make sure that we're on the plus side. We're hiring temporary day laborers. They cost us $19,000 over the last 6 years, but they've collected almost $50,000 worth of seed. So it's easy to see that that's a worthwhile thing for us to be doing. Volunteers, $30,000, almost $30,000 worth of seed collected by volunteers, $13,000 by the certified seed collectors, almost a little over $8,000 by school groups. Again, that's like 4 days of seed collection. 4 days over 6 years. So, and then other volunteers, full-time staff, and the grand total over the last 6 years, we've collected $145,000 worth of seed. So once we've got the seed collected, the next thing we do is we have to dry it. So we've got all this wet seed material, we bagged it all up, and basically we just lay it out on the ground. We've got a barn out at 1219 Kings Road, which is our field facility. We've designed the loft in the barn with fans and ventilation. There's a big exhaust fan here and little fans that blow. And we just lay the seed out on the ground and let it dry. So after we've collected it, we go and dump it on the floor. We're out there turning it all the time to make sure it's drying evenly. And it can basically, once we let it dry for a couple of weeks, make sure it's really totally dry, and then we bag it up. And that's all we do during field season. After everything's bagged up in the winter, when things slow down a little bit, that's when I do the seed cleaning. So we've got this huge amount of bulk seed, which is the seed, the pods, the leaves, the stems, everything all mixed together. And when we're out there planting, we need it cleaned down to pure seed. And that's the process of seed cleaning. So this is an actual before and after picture here. This is all of our seed exclusive of lupin, which there's way, way more of. This is what I bring out for seed cleaning, and this is what we end up with. So it reduces that bulk down a huge amount. You can see it would be hard to be out on the landscape with all these bags trying to scatter this stuff around, but it's really feasible when you have it in this state. So we've been working for a long time with the USDA Plant Materials Center out at Big Flats, New York. It's out near Corning, and they have been great partners for us. I'll go out there each winter, usually in January or February, and they not only do they let me use all of their equipment, but they have an employee who's a full-time seed cleaner there, and they donate his time to us also. So the two of us will go out there and clean seed for a couple of days and get all of our seed cleaned for the season. So seed cleaning, just to go through quickly what the process is, because it's kind of interesting. The first step is that you break all this material up. So you've got all these pods and things, you've got to break them all up. The first set of pictures here is a hammer mill. So you basically put the seed down this chute. Inside here are these rotating chunks of metal, and they smash everything all up. You've got a particularly sized screen underneath. So material that's small enough to fit through the screen goes through, and everything else keeps getting chopped until it goes through the screen. So you make that screen size just a little bit bigger than your seeds, and that way the seed all falls through and everything gets, the seed doesn't get pulverized. All the material gets chopped up basically to the size of the seed. The other machine, this down here, is called a brush machine. This is the other machine we use for breaking things up. Again, you put seed down into the hopper, and then it comes out inside this drum. This is a screen drum. And these brushes rotate around and push the seed out through the screen. So this one's a little bit less destructive if you have things that don't need to be chopped quite as much. We can use this machine to do that. But the crux of it is you're breaking all this material up into little pieces. And then the second step is to use various vibrating screens and air to separate out all the seed from all of the lighter pods and dust and bits of sticks and things. So you've made everything a uniform size, but they're still bigger and smaller within that. And then you've got air to help with the separation. So there are 3 different machines here. This top one is a little tabletop model. It's only about this big. The middle one, you can see me here, so you get a reference to that size. And then we've got a real big one that's floor to ceiling. They all have these various screens that go in and they vibrate. And I actually got a little video of this also to show you what this looks like. So this is that middle-sized machine, and this is me cleaning horse mint. If you put the seed down the hopper, it falls out onto this vibrating screen. And you've got junk material coming out of both of these chutes. And then the good seed falls down this sinuous pathway, which has a counter current of air blowing up from the bottom. Seed is falling down. And good seed ends up down in here, and anything light blows out that top. So these are really these machines are quite the feats of engineering. Pretty spectacular to see them work. So break it up and screen it out, but lest you should think that it's quite so simple, these are our seed cleaning data sheets. You can see for something like bush clover, first we break it up, then we screen it out, then we break it up again, screen it out again. It's a little bit more complicated than just break it up and screen it out. It's quite an involved process, but the crux of it is break it up. So just to go through that process with horse mint, so you've got horse mint collected in its raw form here. This is one that we put through the brush machine. And in the brush machine, the good seed gets pushed through the screen and ends up in this bin down here. And then scrap material, some scrap material comes out the end, so this stuff gets discarded. And then the good seed goes through the screen cleaner one time, it ends up a little bit cleaner. And then it goes back into the screen cleaner again, it ends up pretty pure, and then we're able to use that to plant and end up with more fields of horse mint. And that's all I've got for now. So it's it's an interesting process. It's really important to what we do. I'm happy to take any questions if you've got them.
Anything for Jesse?
All right.
Thanks, Jesse.
You're welcome.
So now we have Dr. Steve Campbell talking about our Conroe Blue Butterfly monitoring work.
I think most of you are already at least somewhat familiar with the Conroe Blue Butterfly and our recovery efforts here at the Albany Pine Bush Preserve. So I'm only going to provide a little bit of background as review, and then I'm going to give you an update from the 2014 field season. And just to note that this is work that I do with the Conservation Director, Neil Gifford, and also our field ecologist and environmental educator, Amanda Dillon. Okay, this is just a reminder of what a typical year looks like for the Conroe Blue Butterfly. The eggs that overwinter hatch out around April, and then those larvae feed on lupin. They grow, they pupate, and then the adults, first brood of adults, emerge around May. Those guys live for about 2 to 5 days. During that time, they mate and lay eggs. Those eggs then develop and hatch. We get another larvae that then also feed on lupin. They grow, they pupate, and then the second brood of adults emerge around July. Those adults then mate, lay eggs that overwinter, and that completes the annual life cycle for the Conroe Blue Butterfly. So that gives rise to what's known as a bivoltine life cycle. So that's just 2 generations per year. And so here's just a graph showing a schematic of how adult abundance changes over time. And you can see there's the first hump here that represents the first brood, and then the second hump here represents the second brood of butterflies, adult butterflies. Okay, the butterfly has experienced a greater than 90% decline in distribution abundance since the 1970s. The yellow area, here, that represents the area where the species used to occur. Now the species is, the natural populations are now limited to Wisconsin, Michigan, New York, and maybe Indiana. They think the population may have gone extinct there in the last year or two. The population in New York is the only natural population left east of the Great Lakes. New Hampshire does have a population, but we don't consider it natural anymore because it did actually go extinct and has since been restarted with captive individuals. Okay, to help prevent the further decline of the Conroe Blue Butterfly, New York State DEC listed it as endangered within New York State in 1977, and then U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service followed suit in 1992 by listing the species as endangered across its entire range. Now, when a species is listed as endangered, a recovery plan needs to be developed that outlines actions that need to be taken to recover the species. And also within that recovery plan, there has to be criteria that are developed that determine whether or not recovery is achieved. So the federal recovery criteria calls for 1 or more viable population in all 13 recovery units. And so these stippled areas that you see here, these are the different recovery units. So they're looking for 1 or more viable populations in all 13 recovery units. And the Glacial Lake Albany Recovery Unit, where we are, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is calling for 3 viable populations within that federal recovery unit. Now, if we look in the Glacial Lake Albany Federal Recovery Unit, there's 4 state recovery units. There's Queensbury, Saratoga Sandplain, Saratoga West, and then the Albany Pine Bush. So U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is calling for 3 of these 4 state recovery units to have viable populations. And state recovery, to meet state recovery criteria, we're looking for 4 viable populations. So all 4 state recovery units have to have viable populations. And what I mean here by viable populations in terms of federal and state recovery criteria, a viable population is at least 3,000 first or second brood adults in 4 out of 5 consecutive years. Okay, so that's just a little bit of background about the butterfly. Now I just want to mention our recovery efforts at the Albany Pine Bush Preserve. As you know, we're in a highly urbanized area. Years of fire suppression has led to the incursion of surrounding forest trees such as aspen and white pine, which led to the invasion of non-native species such as black locust, and has also led to the establishment of really thick patches of scrub oak. So much of the area in the preserve is not in high-quality butterfly habitat. So one of the Commission's primary goals is to restore these degraded areas into high-quality pitchpine scrub oak barrens. So given that habitat management represents a significant portion of the work that we do here at the preserve, what Jesse presented to you was just like a small fraction of really the habitat management work that Joel and Jesse are in charge of doing here at the preserve. One of the most dramatic examples Jesse already touched on is the removal of black locust. This is completely unsuitable as butterfly habitat, and so as he already said, we cut down the trees, remove the logs, rip up the stumps, basically starting from scratch, plant it with native vegetation that includes lupin and nectar sources for their butterflies, and after a couple of years, hopefully we get something like this. Some other examples of habitat management we're doing here is mowing, in particular scrub oak. So you can get these really thick patches of scrub oak. So to prevent these things from growing up into really tall, dense thickets of scrub oak, we mow these areas. And so this is typically what it looks like after it's mowed, but this is really only a temporary measure because within a few years these things pretty much bounce right back. They resprout and they bounce right back to what they were. And then something else important that we really do here is we reintroduce fire through prescribed burning. And this past year we had one of the best years of record, best years on record for fire. The goal each year is to burn 200 acres. And this is the first year that we accomplished this goal, so hats off to Tyler Briggs, our fire management specialist, for he was largely responsible for making this happen in 2014. Okay, so now once we restore patches, the butterflies just don't show up into these patches, at least not right away, especially for some of these patches that are really far out there and isolated. So we accelerate the colonization of these patches through captive rearing and release. So we collect gravid females on site. Neil typically will drive these gravid females to New Hampshire Department of Fish and Game. There they collect the eggs from the gravid females. They rear the eggs until they hatch. They feed the larvae, and when those larvae pupate, they send the pupae back to us, and then we put these pupae in these butterfly tents with a nectar source, and then typically soon after they emerge, we release those adult butterflies on site. And so in 2014, we released nearly 900 butterflies into new sites. And so if we add that to our previous releases that go back to 2008, we've released a total of about 6,500 butterflies into the preserve, into these restored areas. Okay, so by this point, hopefully I've given you at least a little bit of an idea that we're putting a lot of effort into recovering these butterflies. But we'd like to know, are our efforts working? In particular, is our population increasing? And if so, how are we doing relative to the state and federal recovery criteria? Which, remember, we're looking for greater than 3,000 first or second brood adults in 4 out of 5 years. So we need to monitor population size, and specifically we need to monitor brood size. And brood size is the cumulative number of butterflies that emerge within a flight period or a brood. So how many butterflies have emerged within each brood? So we monitor population size. We collect those data using distance sampling. And with distance sampling, observers just walk along the transects, and every time they encounter a butterfly, they measure the perpendicular distance of the butterfly to the transect, and they put that into one of these distance classes. And then observers revisit these transects. They do this at multiple sites throughout the preserve, and they revisit these transects within these sites multiple times throughout the spring and throughout the summer. So they get enough observations within each brood. And I'm not going to go into any details about the distance sampling more than that, or about the analysis. All I'm going to say about this is that distance sampling allows us to estimate the number of butterflies that are actually out there. So it takes the number of butterflies that we actually saw by walking the transect, and distance sampling allows us to estimate the number of butterflies that we missed. So we can take the number of butterflies that we saw, the estimate of how many butterflies we missed, and we can combine that to give an estimate for how many butterflies did we see out there at a given survey. So then we get to brood sizes using a two-step approach. So we start with the raw counts here that we've gathered using distance sampling. And then, as I said, we adjust those estimates up, or adjust our raw counts up to account for the butterflies that we missed. And that gives us our abundance estimates at each of the different surveys. And then we fit an insect population curve to each of these abundances. And there's several parameters that control the shape of how this insect population curve fits to the data. But one of the parameters gives us an estimate of brood size. So by fitting the curve to these data, we can get an estimate of brood size. And remember, brood size is the number of adults that have emerged over the course of this brood. So this is the beginning of the brood, peak emergence, and then this is the end of the brood. Okay, so how are the butterflies doing? So the first thing I want you to notice on this is that the amount of area that we've been surveying over time has increased. And this increase represents a restoration of pitch pine scrub oak barrens. And then, remember I said we restore those areas and release the butterflies into those areas. So this increase in the amount of area that we're surveying represents that increase in restored habitats that have butterflies in them. So this past year we surveyed, we're up to about 42 hectares that we're surveying. Hectare is about 2.5 acres. Okay, so now let's overlay the brood sizes on there. So early on there was some fluctuations here, but you can see really, especially within the past couple of years, the butterfly population has really increased quite dramatically. And so given this increase, it would appear that our recovery efforts are working. Remember, our recovery threshold was 3,000 for state and federal recovery. So in 2013, the second brood of 2013 was the first time we exceeded this recovery threshold of 3,000. We had about 5,000 individuals that year, and then the population in 2014 has continued to increase. And in 2014, both first and second brood were well over the recovery threshold of 3,000, and our second brood was up over 14,000 individuals. Okay, now in the last 2 years, we've actually seen enough butterflies out there to estimate subpopulation numbers. And so if we can do that, then we can see how each of these different subpopulations are contributing to the overall populations. So we grouped patches into subpopulations primarily based on their proximity to other patches. So if patches were within 200 meters of each other, generally we said those were within the same subpopulation. Now you'll notice there's some places where there's a lot of overlap. And the reason for that is, even though some patches were within 200 meters of each other, there were certain cases where roads basically acted as geographic barriers within the subpopulation. So some of these places, even though patches were maybe within 200 meters of each other, if there was a road bisecting those patches, we tended to consider those as separate subpopulations. So that's why we get a little bit of overlap. But by and large, any patch within 200 meters of each other was considered the same subpopulation. So here is this is a breakdown of the subpopulation size of the second brood in 2013. These colors here coordinate with the subpopulations over here in the map. And one of the things that jumps out at you pretty quickly is that most of the population here is occurring within this orange piece of the pie. So that's the King Roads Barren subpopulation, has well over half the population in 2013. And if we look at the second brood of 2014, you can still see it's Kings Road Barrens again that has the largest contribution to the overall population. Well, you'll notice here that Pine Bush Southwest, the purple slice, actually increased quite dramatically from 2013 to 2014, and that's because we added a really good site in there in 2014 that had just come online. We've been restoring that site and releasing butterflies over the last 3 years. It was finally ready. We put it into our survey rotation in 2014, and so you can see that there was quite a few butterflies out at that site, and so that increased the number of butterflies in the overall population. Okay, so let's look in a little more detail at what's going on at some of the sites that make up Kings Road Barrens subpopulation. So this is a site, Asphalt is a site within Kings Road Barren subpopulation. And these, what you see down here, these are just the raw counts of butterflies, just to show the general pattern of what's happening here. So red is 2013, blue is 2014. So here we have the first brood here, second brood here in 2013, first brood here, second brood here in 2014. You can see here we got a little bit of a late start in 2014. We missed, or maybe I should say the brood got a little bit of an early start in 2014. So we missed the front end of this brood, but we still saw enough of it to get population estimates. So now this is what was going on with the population dynamics. So let's look to see how management fits in with this. So if you look over here, early, before the growing season started in 2013, we mowed the scrub oak out at Asphalt. And so that was before the start of the growing season. Then come spring, the vegetation started to recover and grow. And by the second brood of 2013, the vegetation had recovered to a point where that site supported a good number of butterflies. Then the vegetation continued to grow there. And you can see even at the first brood of 2014, we still had a fair number of butterflies at that site. This picture here shows you what the site looked like right around the beginning of June. But then you can see just another month of vegetation growing. And what really happened is the scrub oak really started to grow back up and basically overtake the site again. And by that time then, the second brood of 2014, the number of butterflies at that site had decreased from what it formerly was. Okay, one other site we'll look at here, this is Alley Cat. This is also a site within the Kings Road Barren subpopulation. So you can see here, there was not much going on at this site in 2013. At the end of 2013, we mowed it and then we burned it. And then the following spring, the vegetation started to recover, but you can see by the first brood it hadn't recovered enough to really have a lot of butterflies at that site. However, by a little bit more growth, by the second brood, you can see the butterflies really moved into that site. By the second brood, so that was just less than a year after the burn occurred. They really peaked at that site. And so here is just to show you those sites on the same timeline. The vertical dashed line here shows when the management occurred. So at Asphalt, management occurred here. The second brood of 2013. That site, Asphalt, supported a lot of the second brood, a lot of butterflies during the second brood, some in the first brood here, but by the second brood of 2014, 1 year later, that site had really, the number of butterflies at that site had really decreased. Meanwhile, over in Alley Cat, not much was going on in 2013, the management happened, and then you can see, while the butterflies were declining in Asphalt, they were increasing in Alley Cat. And then I didn't show you, but there's also another site out in Kings Road Barrens called Andromeda, that was mowed around the same time that Alley Cat was burned, mowed and burned. Not much was going on there in 2013, but again, we had the same response as we did at Alley Cat out as Andromeda. Okay, and this is just if you want to put things in a spatial context. So this shows you where the sites are in relation to each other. So what I want to say here is, what did I want to say here? Is some of the changes, at least some of the changes we were seeing among these different sites were due to, probably very likely due to butterflies moving among these sites. Because these sites were in such close proximity, as suitability of Asphalt was decreasing, those butterflies probably moved over to Alley Cat and Andromeda as those areas were increasing in suitability. And so the net effect on that subpopulation was actually positive. So in 2014, even though the suitability of asphalt was decreasing, the suitability of Alley Cat and Andromeda was probably increasing. And so what we saw was that we saw actually still, even though we lost the habitat of asphalt, we still saw a net increase within that subpopulation from, in the second brood here going from 2013 to 2014. Okay, just to summarize then, so far, most of my work on the Carter blue butterflies to this point has been figuring out how to estimate the population size of these things. It seems like it'd be relatively simple to count butterflies, but it's far more complicated than I would have imagined. I think there's still a few things I'm working out, but I think I mostly have the methods figured out for how to estimate the population sizes. And the result of that is that we can see that the population size is increasing at the preserve. So we know what would be the next step to go from this is then to take up the population dynamics and relate that to habitat management. And we know in a generic sense that yes, our habitat management is working. We've restored the amount of area that we've restored has increased, and we've also seen an increase in the population size. However, we need to take this a step further. What I've showed you is kind of very anecdotal. So we had, for example, an alley cat. This is what the population was doing before. Management happened, and we looked like we got a population response. And I just showed you a couple sites, but that's a very anecdotal observation. The next step for me is to get at this much more quantitatively and in a rigorous way to start to relate habitat management to population dynamics, so that hopefully we can back it up with a little more science than essentially what this is here is just an interesting kind of picture and a story. But so that's kind of where I'm going to be going with this in the future. Is we'll obviously continue to monitor the population size, but then start to tie that to in a quantitative way to our habitat management. And I'm sure that you will be hearing more from me about this in the future as I work on that. So I'll take any questions if you have any. Yes.
How long, or how many brood cycles does the beneficial effect of the mow and burn last?
There it looks like we have, it looks like they only last about a year and a half in terms of before the vegetation becomes unsuitable. So here's when we had it here. We had, so this was early spring 2013, and by the end of the fall, it was already gone. So it was like basically just over about a year and a half, maybe, at this site. Whether or not how this holds up across other sites, I think how the vegetation responds is probably going to be a little bit different depending on management. This was mowed. Mowing and burning maybe will act a little bit differently, but these are some of the things that we need to get at. But right now, based on how we're hitting those sites, it looks like you have about a year and a half to 2 years before.
And Don, that's largely related to the site that the asphalt site is one of those sites that we have not thinned the scrub oak yet. So when we mow it or burn it, the scrub oak comes right back and is dense again a year later, overshadowing all the lupin we planted. Alley cat and asphalt, we have thinned the scrub oak, so we've bought ourselves more time. So in sites where we're really working with scrub oak thickets, you get a year, maybe two, until it's less suitable for butterflies. Where we've thinned the scrub oak, we think we've bought ourselves 3, 4, 5 years between treatments to basically create more permanent space between the scrub oak so the lupin stays in the daylight.
So you really need a 3-stage, not a 2-stage process.
Right. Thanks for bringing that up, Don. I wanted to mention that, so I'm glad you brought that up. But yeah, so we're trying to look at to make it a little more sustainable rather than trying to keep hitting these areas every couple of years to try to make it suitable for the butterflies. So something like that will buy us some more time.
And your grassy fields will stay viable a lot longer because they don't have enough woody cover yet.
But they come with their own cost too, because sometimes if they're out exposed to the sun, the eggs and the larvae will sometimes bake on really hot days. And so we want that kind of mix of, we want some scrub oak mixed in.
Other questions for Steve?
You guys know where to find me if you have.
Thanks, Steve. We just need to go into a brief executive session so I can update folks on real property as a follow-up to the real property discussion that we had at the December meeting. Can we have a resolution?
So
A motion. Second. All in favor?
Almost.